Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. The other day, some friends in Europe sent me a video from the Dutch government, which was explaining to people that soon there may be blackouts and that people should be prepared. So one of the tips they had was that you should have your cell phone all charged up, and you should have a portable battery with you, and you should be aware of the fact that maybe the transit stations won't work anymore, your ATM card won't work, your credit cards won't work, that you might be stuck at transit stations if you have a long way to get home. And so they gave some tips about how to be prepared, especially to have your cell phone charged up and to have a spare battery, which sounded great, except the day after, the cell phone companies in Europe said that if in the event of a major blackout, not just a regional area, they would only have about half an hour of batteries for their cell towers. So it's something that people really have to be prepared for now, especially at this time of geopolitical conflict, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You know, things could blossom into something more. Not to mention, we always have severe storms in winter, and they often will knock out the power in Canada for a couple of hours or a couple of days. A few times it's been a couple of weeks. So anyway, out of this conversation, Rob Lemaire, an engineer in Belgium, sent us a little column that I'm going to read you later, but it's called The Energy Crisis, What to Do in the Event of a Blackout. And that's a pretty good question, isn't it? What should we do in the event of a blackout? Well, we need to be prepared. We need to have some alternate sources of energy. So before any of these crises happen, people should go out and maybe get themselves some kind of portable flashlights like this. When you're out and about, you might want to have a little kind of battery flashlight in your pocket so that you don't have to use your cell phone in the event that you're stuck in a building where the lights go out. At home, you might want to have a portable transistor radio with batteries. Usually you don't keep the batteries in the radio, but you keep them with the radio. And then you can put them in if there's a crisis. In your backpack, you might want to have some snacks of some kind, and maybe even one of these little emergency blankets. They're not very heavy to carry around, but in the event that you're stuck somewhere, it might be a good idea to have them. If you have small children at home and you need to have hands-free, you could consider one of these. They're very useful for camping and hiking and hunting. So it's got, this one I think has 3 different levels of brightness. But it'll keep your head warm and give you hands-free lighting. And of course, you know, you should always be prepared at home with some water. Not necessarily in individual bottles. You could have large bottles if you're capable of pouring from them. But you need to have water and probably some canned food that you can open easily, either with the pop-up lids or have a couple of can openers around so that you're not stuck in the event that you can't cook food. And of course, there's the old standby, candles and matches. But you know, make sure you've got some kind of a safe container, especially if you have pets or small children that might accidentally knock it over. So those are just some very basic things that a person could do. And at the bottom of our blog post, we've got a list of some resources that you could look at. So let me just read what Rob wrote. He said, you can read today in the mainstream media that we're in an energy crisis where people ask themselves things like, will we suffer cold this winter? The analysis is mainly limited to high prices and to the ogre Putin. That we now risk more blackouts and other energy supply problems than ever because of the crazy European climate policy, you hear less. Take the closure of the nuclear power stations in some and the overinvestment in renewable energy in all Western nations. These measures should protect us against a climate disaster, but they turn out to be a disaster in themselves. Maybe we grit our teeth at these bad political decisions. Nevertheless, we need to take them into account now, not only because of the higher energy prices, but also the collapsing energy security and the general impoverishment that's now accelerating. We should not underestimate the seriousness. Even with a pragmatic government tomorrow, it will take years before the situation is more or less back on track. So energy policy is always a long haul. Still, Rob writes here, I don't want to give rise to panic, and neither do I. That's not my style. Even though it can get quite difficult, fear is not a good counselor. But neither is blindness. So he talks here about blackouts in other countries, and there are some links if you want to follow them and see what the consequences were. He writes, there have been more power outages in the West. For example, in Green, California, not coincidentally, with a lot of renewable energy, it has so many supply problems, they even have a website to map the problem at any time. Also instructive is the significant blackout in South Australia in September of 2016, which was followed by a sharp increase in electricity bills, given the many wrong investments of the renewable energy policy. Part of the population thus fell into poverty. A region of 55 million inhabitants across Canada and the USA suffered a blackout in 2003, causing damage between 6 and 10 billion euros. So, is Europe headed for a similar scenario? On Doorbrock, that's a magazine that he writes for, where this was originally published, people have already talked about a possible blackout in Belgium, especially in 2024. But it can also come faster. Maybe this winter already. This discussion is already raging in other countries. The Times warned a few days ago that millions of households in the United Kingdom could be switched off for up to 3 hours. Die Welt speaks of a blackout danger in Germany of more than 72 hours. France is already in the danger zone, according to Lviv. And why is there more chance of a blackout? Well, there are various reasons for an increased risk of blackout. Take the 2 Belgian nuclear reactors that have shut down in recent weeks. One more incident in combination with a little renewable energy, and they're done. A lot of renewable energy has obvious consequences. If in one European country a little sun shines at night, there's little sunshine at night, for example, and there's little wind power, the same situation is probably true in many neighboring countries. So what he's saying here is that wind and solar have regional impacts. So the wind isn't always blowing somewhere. It's quite often nowhere, just to clarify that. So in that case, a country can expect very little help from its neighboring countries. And here this is a different situation than Canada. The countries in Europe are very well interconnected, and they've often relied very heavily on, say, nuclear power from France. But about half of France's fleet is offline right now under maintenance. So There's a kind of a confluence of problems all at the same time in Europe. So in that case, it can expect little help from neighboring countries. Combined with less nuclear energy and more electric cars, which will strongly boost our consumption of electricity, according to the plan's 3 billion kilowatt hours or more by 2026, or war. Green pressure made Europe choose Russian gas. As a result, Europeans cannot technically handle American gas with a different composition, and Putin is also rubbing his hands over the European ban on the extraction of shale gas, because Europe actually has a lot of shale gas, but they've banned the exploitation of it for various climate and other reasons. But now they're really stuck because, especially Germany, I think Germany was relying on Russia for about 40% of the gas that they normally would use for heating, for industry, and for driving their electrical grid. Because natural gas is always used as a backup for wind and solar. And then Rob continues, in addition, a cyber attack or other form of terror on our electrical facilities can also lead to a blackout, either by enemy powers or extreme climate activists. Even Earth Hour, massively turning off the lights for an hour, is not innocent. It was one of the reinforcing factors in the blackout in Italy in 2003. After all, a blackout also happens when there's an electricity surplus, for example, on a sunny day with a strong wind. So let's consider a blackout versus a shutdown plan. Will there be a lot of blackouts coming at us now? As an engineer, that's Rob, the author of this, I have to point out the technical solutions to keep the situation manageable. The press often does not distinguish between a blackout and a shutdown. The first concerns a sudden interruption of a large part of the electricity grid due to an accident. The second, a shutdown, is temporary and also limited, but it's an announced intervention by the network administrator to prevent a blackout. The difference is less significant for consumers, even though a shutdown is no fun too. But, everyone's gotten a notice from their local electricity provider that, there's going to be a 2 or 3 hour shutdown, between 8 in the morning and noon or something like that. These are scheduled maintenance shutdowns, and so you can prepare for that. You can put some water by in your kettle and some pans on the stove. You can make sure that you have food ready that you can eat, maybe make up some sandwiches, and you don't have to worry about cooking anything. But blackouts happen unexpectedly. So the Belgian shutdown plan will try to avoid large city centers and capitals and ensure that there's more or less equal distribution of the burden. The country is divided into different regions, each of which is shut down. The country is divided into different regions, each of which is shut down for a limited time using a rotation system. And there's more information on that on their government website. A possible disadvantage of this is that the shutdown plan is put into effect in consultation with the today irresponsible government, or perhaps not. Other countries probably have similar plans. So Rob's concerned because there are a lot of complex issues related to energy provision in Belgium, mostly related to the shutdown of nuclear facilities, which defeats their reliability. So he counsels people, prepare for the worst. So what can we do? Well, use less energy. That makes sense, and given the price increases, everyone's already doing that, but that won't stop the disaster. So make sure, as I said off the top, that you have a radio with batteries to keep informed. There's also radios that you can wind up, like people often have those in their car for emergency. gives you a limited amount of time to listen to the radio, but you don't need batteries. But this would be fine as well. Also have some flashlights, a cooler box, freezer ice packs and candles. Have an emergency kit. Have some non-perishable food, some drink, daily consumables, and handy tools. The chances of needing all this might be slim, but the situation is serious enough. Be aware that there may be other supply problems, like with gas. Prepare alternative ways to heat your home, and be kind to your neighbors, because when the going gets tough, you're going to need them. Above all, prepare yourself psychologically. What kind of scenarios can we expect, from a few hours to perhaps days without electricity? From an orderly shutdown to a chaotic blackout where no one knows exactly when the electricity will come back? Remember, some brief bursts of chaos during the corona crisis. During a prolonged energy crisis, the problem can become much worse. And inform your children in advance, not only about what awaits them, but also why. And with small children, sometimes you might be able to actually turn this into a game. You know, if you have a pop-up tent at home, might be a place where they can go in there, and actually that will help them keep warm if you have a blackout and some kind of gas supply interruption for heating. Of course, keep candles away from those things, those pop-up tents. And then Rob gives us a tip here: don't join Earth Hour. Earth Hour, as we saw, is a possible reason for a blackout. It's not a noble act, it's an act of sabotage. The next one is scheduled for March 25th, 2023. Don't participate in it. Don't. So what can you do during the lockdown? Watch out for hypothermia in winter. Unplug critical equipment or turn off certain fuses to prevent damage when the power comes back on. And don't panic, but be prepared for possible panic in others. Keep in touch with the weak in the family, the vulnerable, in the circle of friends, or in the neighborhood, especially during longer periods, during severe winters. And what are the chances of a blackout or long shutdown period during this winter? For real, blackout maybe not very long, but what are the chances of it happening if our energy policies continue this way? Well, then it seems pretty sure to me, says Rob. Moreover, those who are prepared for worse can also overcome less bad situations. A good attitude is not unimportant during difficult times, for example, and the wish to keep your family together applies both during stability and through crisis situations. So the longer-term effects of these blackouts, well, as South Australia taught us above, the effects of blackouts and renewable energy policies will reverberate into the form of poverty for years to come. Businesses do not like energy insecurity. Not only industry, also all forms of information technology, IT, our growing digital money economy, and services. Even if we got a government tomorrow that wants to take the problems by the horns, we're not there yet. Energy revolutions always take many years and require expensive investments over a long period of time. For those who care, expect big movements in the stock market. I wrote about this 2 years ago in an article called From Climate Bubble to Stock Market Crash. So try to make your portfolio as independent as possible from the climate industry. Take our pension funds, for example, which are full of green investments that will eventually collapse. A realistic scenario? Well, expect problems during a dark and cold winter period,
especially in combination with less wind, problems in the gas or nuclear industry, and shortages on the wider scale. Solidarity then quickly disappears. Each country has to deal with its own difficulties, and few countries would be willing to export electricity unless it's at a very high price. This may last for a period of several days or even longer. Either a shutdown plan comes into effect, and many citizens will then be without power for several hours on a regular basis, or there will be an effective blackout, and that means much more chaos. When will something like this happen? No one can answer that, but with the current energy policy, it's almost inevitable that one will arrive. So, prepare yourself, both practically and mentally. So, and at the end of this item on our blog, we've posted some links to the Red Cross 3-day emergency kit. The Alberta government has 14-day and 72-hour emergency kits. These are instructions of what you probably should have in such a kit for your household. There's also the Doctors for Disaster Preparedness. There's a nuclear survival kit information, and pages 24 and 25 have a list of supplies. And the Canadian government, there's a link to power outages, which also addresses some of the seasonal things that we face in Canada, like times of terrific snowfall or spring flooding. So anyway, I hope that you found that a bit helpful. And as Rob said, we shouldn't panic, but we should be prepared. The world is rather unstable these days, so be ready for it. And just a few hours and a few dollars of preparation can make all the difference to your comfort level during a difficult time like a blackout or a shutdown. So thanks very much for listening. Have a look at our blog. Follow the information in those links. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.